Tonight we're here to talk about Elise. Now, I missed out on her talk a couple years ago, which I have been kicking myself ever since, so make sure you pay attention. We're recording this, so thankfully you can't miss out on it. Now, Elise started her IO career at St. Norbert College in 1989, and she graduated in 1989 and then continued her IO career at Purdue University, where she stayed until she finished with her PhD. Now, she began working at St. Thomas in 1997, and she's been there ever since. Keep your peepers peeled because she does have a book that is in print right now. So if you want to learn all about the psychology of environmental problems and sustainable solutions, keep an eye out. And you know what? If you ask, I bet she'll sign your copy. Elise, I'll hand it off to you.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. So can people give me a thumbs up if you can see my slide, Advancing Sustainability in Organizations? Awesome. Thank you. So I do sit in academia for the most part, but I do consider myself research practitioner, and as most of us do, where I like to actually do what I teach other people to do. And it's been about a dozen years that I've been using my IO background to change my institution, the University of St. Thomas. And, you know, I can vouch for the fact that organizational change takes a very long time. It's about the long game. And what I'd like to do is talk about what has worked at my institution to try and generate more momentum, as you know, slow change is really a mismatch for the urgency of the environmental challenges such as climate change that we're facing. But I do believe in my heart and soul that organizations play a critical role. And so what I thought I'd do tonight is start by talking about what I found in the research this summer when I was working on the latest edition of my textbook, and then give you a little bit of a case study. And being a teacher, I am fine with people interjecting and asking questions if I'm not clear, or if you have a burning question, please feel free to pipe up. So let me get started here. So I consider myself an organizational change maker. I'm professor in the psychology department. I am the chair of an interdisciplinary department, Earth, Environment, and Society. And I'm also the director and founder of the Office of Sustainability Initiatives at St. Thomas. And so I have a direct line to faculty, staff, students, and administrator through all those different roles. As Roger mentioned, I have a textbook that I co-author with several of my colleagues. It is coming out in the 5th edition in March, and I'd be delighted to sign a copy for anybody. There will be a lot of used copies around of the 4th edition, which has a lot of good stuff in it. So that's quite a sustainable thing to do, is to buy used books. And I'm happy to sign one of those too, if you'd like. So in about 2001, I started seeing the connection between, my role in IO, thinking about jobs and skills and work and what needed to be done regarding unsustainable human behavior. And that's when I started talking to other colleagues about this. And in 2004, I started collaborating in very tentative ways. We started working with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to assess their let's see, I can't even remember what it's called now. I just missed one state fair and I can't remember anything. We used to work out at the state fair at the eco building that the MPCA put on. And we used to help them understand what was working and what wasn't working through exit interviews. And I started changing my courses to try and include a sustainability lens, and started writing and teaching. And once I got my own work on track, then I started reaching out to other faculty about helping them with their classes. And I started getting bolder about insisting whenever I could that St. Thomas should engage in becoming more sustainable. So in about 2006, I started offering faculty workshops and started doing things like getting in on the discussions for strategic planning and making sure sustainability got into the strategic vision. I started dabbling in Division 34 of the American Psychological Association, which is population conservation and environmental psychology. And there are now 2 IO psychologists involved in that group, and I would love to see more folks who are engaged in APA at some level to consider engaging in Division 34 as well. It's really a great group of people to think about these things with. And so most recently, I've been, since about 2017, I've been working on more translational work. So there's a science article in 2017 that summarizes some of the key psychological barriers to human behavior in the sustainability world. And it's really been rewarding to share what we know in both IO, specifically in psychology in general, to people outside of psychology, people who are actually doing the work out in the field, and other types of scientists. Scientists have this problem because we believe in data and literature and that kind of things. We tend to assume other people are compelled by the same data and preponderance of literature that we are, and people aren't. And so trying to figure out how to help everyday people think differently about the world is really, it's been a good experience for me. So let's get down to business here. I'd like to start with sort of my favorite way of thinking about sustainability. And this is a quote from a distinguished professor from Oberlin. He works in environmental studies and political science. So sustainable design is the careful nesting of human purposes within the larger patterns and flows of the natural world. And I find this to be really powerful in that, humans don't have separate rules of physics. Everything we have and do is really 100% dependent on the Earth's resources. And so sustainability isn't just a nice thing. It's not something that is happening somewhere out there sometime down the road. It really is an essential way to do our work, is to do it sustainably. So before I highlight some of the recent work in the field, I'd like to say a few words about how the current pandemic may help us better deal with the climate crisis. So we're seeing that around the globe, nations are being forced to reckon with the social inequities and the tenuous state of our ecological systems, which have been totally laid plain by the pandemic and climate-related emergencies, the fires and the storms. And it's been a wild year, 2020, yikes. So we're going to be coming out of this pandemic, hopefully sooner rather than later. And our world has changed so substantially that we really have an opportunity here to sort of reset what our goals are moving forward, and also the means by which they're achieved. And you've probably heard the Biden administration use the hashtag of Build Back Better. This actually originated in 2017 as part of the UN disaster recovery, risk reduction, and resilience planning efforts at the UN. So it's really great to see a US administration sort of embracing this United Nations way of thinking about things. And there's some really interesting research that started popping up after COVID hit. There's one project out of the UK, Kenward and Brick, that shows some initial evidence that people are poised to support recovery plans that prioritize the environment. Even conservative voters prefer the environment to be at the heart of post-COVID economic reconstruction in the UK. So that, you know, in the UK is probably the most similar to the US in sort of the populist turn that politics has taken. So I find that to be hopeful research. And then there's some additional research that proposes that experiencing collective success in one arena, such as like working together to flatten the curve during the coronavirus, may increase collective efficacy to address other problems, such as climate change. And this is coming out of a lab. Reese and his colleagues are some of the big heavy hitters in collective action. And so this is also very hopeful to me. Some other things that have sort of popped up through the pandemic that are really parallel in some ways to the climate crisis that we're facing. One is that the economy, the global economy, is a lot like the Earth's natural ecosystems in that it's really highly interconnected. And so what happens in one part of the system affects what happens in other parts of the system. So ecologically, you might use the example of burning coal in China affects the levels of mercury in fish in Minnesota. And so it matters how all the different parts in this interconnected system are moving towards sustainability. And, you know, we need to move, we need to make sure other people are moving, because what one entity does affects other entities. To me, this is sort of the single most driving principle for my work. Another feature of things that we've witnessed during the pandemic is that acting early reduces long-term negative impacts. And so those sort of upstream solutions being better than downstream solutions. It's just easier and less expensive to hit something hard at the beginning than to let it fester and grow bigger, and then it becomes more hazardous and more expensive to change and that kind of thing.
Elise, is there a dramatic example of an upstream solution?
Dramatic.
I mean, like maybe the river's not on fire because we...
Well, you know, what I think of is that, you know, greenhouse gases, we've waited so long to deal with these things that dealing with the sheer magnitude of greenhouse gases is really hard now, when it would have been a lot easier, you know, 10 years ago. And yet doing something about it now is going to be so much easier and less expensive than waiting and dealing with it down the road. So I guess that's probably the most dramatic example. I mean, there are some more everyday examples like reduce, reuse, recycle. Well, recycling is great. We don't want people to stop recycling, but that's like the last ditch before throwing something away, right? It's actually better to like not create the item in the first place, like not create the packaging in the first place that has to be recycled. So reducing upfront takes a lot less energy and resources than recycling something down the road. Again, don't want to stop recycling, but it's really sort of a downstream solution rather than an upstream solution. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yeah, that helps. And I think another big part of it is that costs are way out of whack. Costs that we pay are not aligned with the damage done to the environment.
True, and so that's an example of how a field that's not, economics has been around forever, but sustainability is super relevant to economics because some of the assumptions they work with just aren't compatible with the true environmental realities we have. So the costs that you're able to just ignore are really costs that should be part of the price of goods and that kind of thing. So externalities is like something we got to totally rethink, because like there's no other planet to rely on for those externalities. It's like this closed loop system. So just because it's going away from your house doesn't mean it's going away from the planet, kind of thing. Okay, so then what else? Flattening the curve is exactly what we need to do with the greenhouse gases. We got to keep it from, with all of the unexpected benefits of COVID in terms of working from home and not traveling all over the globe and that kind of thing, we're still increasing our greenhouse gases and into the atmosphere. And so, just stopping what we do is not really enough, but we now understand that flattening the curve is a thing, and it actually applies to climate as well. Another thing I observed is that there's this principle in ecology where diversity and redundancy in ecological systems is related to the resilience of those systems when under stress. So like if you've, think about the Irish potato famine, it's like if you're just planting one kind of food and something goes wrong, you got nothing else. You don't have backup. But if you have lots and lots of different kinds of stuff that you're planting, even if something happens with potatoes, you've got something else to eat. So, an example of where systems broke down during the pandemic is that the run on face masks. Do you remember that? So imports became limited from China. And so the supply chain really wasn't diverse enough to be able to bounce back from that really easily. And so diversification, just like you would do in your investments, is really important when we're trying to build resilient systems. And so all of these different things that we really experienced in a visceral way due to the pandemic can help us maybe think a little bit more about what's going on with stuff like climate change. And another thing, pardon me, that I presented last time I was with you was this diagram about the impact that our behavior has on environmental problems, and how we tend to focus on private sphere behavior, which is good. We don't want people to stop doing things like recycling or carpooling to work, but they're not as, they don't have quite the intensive impact as doing things like changing your social network or changing the organization that, or organizations that you belong to, or voting in particular people and creating laws that drive a lot of behavior. So, you know, even when organizations talk about sustainability, they tend to focus on what individuals can do in their own little area. Like, you know, make sure that you recycle your lunch materials or compost and that kind of thing. Yes, those things are important, but as it turns out, our actual work needs to change, not just all of those ancillary activities. So I want to unpack that a little bit, you know, talking about doing jobs differently. The green economy includes a lot of environmentally related jobs that have been around for a long time, but are now in higher demand. So there are some jobs that are, you know, specialized professions like environmental engineers and conservation scientists, and others are more entry-level trades like insulation installers or hazardous material removers. So there are a lot of jobs that have been around for a long time that just, we need more people doing them. A second part of the green economy is the opportunities that have evolved for individuals to work directly on sustainability. So there are specialists needed to do research, design, build, sell, install, operate, maintain, and regulate new energy technologies, you know, wind, solar, geothermal. These are all new jobs. There are experts needed who would coordinate sustainability initiative within organizations. We have one of those at St. Thomas, guy whose job it is just to coordinate what's going on campus throughout the enterprise. Because the green economy requires fundamentally different processes and technologies and systems, it's generated a plethora of completely new careers. But importantly, like, occupations that are not traditionally associated with the environment are being redesigned to encompass green skills. I mentioned economics before. Architects, builders, engineers, city planners, they're all learning to plan buildings and neighborhoods and cities in ways that alleviate the need for fossil fuel-based temperature control and transportation. So in these jobs, thinking like an ecologist is an important competency within the green economy. So, you know, we as IO psychologists deal a lot with competencies. So let's unpack that for a minute. So sustainability is a competency. You can see on the left of my screen the modern industrial worldview. So since the Industrial Revolution, we've really behaved as if we've had unlimited resources. We can extract things, make products, and then throw away what we don't want. We rely on technology as the fix-it of problems, and we go for efficiency in order to increase profits. But if you look at how ecology works, and the reason why I use ecology as an analogy here is that you know, the planet has been operational for millennia, so it really it works in a sustainable way. So we ought to take our cues from the fact that there are limits to its ability to regenerate. Most ecological systems are circular in nature. There's no such thing as waste. Waste for one from one process is generally food for another. this whole idea of interconnectedness and really thinking carefully before manipulating one part of the system because of the unintended consequences that might arise. And as I mentioned before, diversity being really important for system integrity. So this is what I mean, like a competency of thinking like an ecologist. And what I find really important about this idea is that there are a lot of benefits from shared competencies, right? There's a shared understanding among people where, you know, what you're trying to accomplish. It gives you common language for discussion. It helps you develop a set of questions for further investigating a particular problem, and it gives you criteria for assessing strengths of different solutions that you come up with. And for me, all these things boil down to self-determination. This idea that we like to feel competent and we like to have autonomy and we like to feel like we belong. And a sustainability competency really helps us achieve all of those things. Like if I am trying to solve a problem and I know like, oh, let's see, like how are the resources that I am expecting to use, you know, how easily can they regenerate? And am I part of the problem overuse? It helps me ask a really good question. You have unlimited scope when you've got these basic, you know, heuristics to go by. Otherwise, it's really, since the environmental problems are so dynamic and the solutions that are available are so dynamic, it's impossible to keep track of everything. But if you've got a particular problem and you can kind of use this mental checklist of like regeneration capacity, diversity and redundancy, and, you know, circular systems, it can help you with any problem you encounter. It can help you do the investigative research you need in order to get a really good solution. So a growing number of businesses and governmental bodies are recognizing that long-term economic vitality is completely dependent on healthy humans and healthy ecosystems. There's a Swiss organization that that interviews CEOs, and they interviewed 1,300 CEOs and found that environment and climate change topped the risk agenda for the first time in 2019. So it had been like fourth or fifth on risk that CEOs were concerned about. So it is now really on the minds of many global CEOs. I also wanted to give a shout out to Stoughton, Rousseau, and Kramer. While they didn't do work specific to sustainability, they had a really great article that I, you know, really summarized both the academic and the practical literature on creating momentum toward change. And just like, you know, globalization before and technology, changes that were needed in previous decades, our current big problem that we need to address and have organizations modify to address is sustainability. So everything we know in IO is really applicable. It's kind of the bottom line for me. Very specifically for people who are more I in the way they think about things. Organizations translate their mission and vision and goals by embedding them in their personnel practices. And I just wanted to show this idea that, like, if sustainability is the biggest problem that we're addressing right now, and we know that there's some ways to think about the world differently than what we're used to, how do we align our HR systems with a sustainability competency? And, you know, I think that you can see, I mean, it's it's well known in our field that alignment between your goals and then the policies and practices is essential for making progress. And so what I've been trying to do at St. Thomas, and I'll go over this more later, is, you know, trying to insert sustainability in the way jobs are defined, in the methods of recruitment and selection, in the way we orient people to their work and train them, and in the way they're evaluated and how we reward them. If we're asking for one thing and then, you know, measuring and rewarding something else, you know, that's the proverbial problem, right? So I think it's really important to be thinking both broadly, but also very specifically about aligning what we do with sustainable behavior. Oops, somebody else is here. So another area that I discovered had a little bit of activity when I was doing research for the book this summer is organizational climate. And there's a lot of research, but very little of it is in the United States. Germany, Australia, Canada, there are people around the globe who are trying to figure out the impact of a green organizational climate on worker behavior. And as you'd suspect, policies and procedures that have a sustainability orientation do seem to be related to a green organizational climate. And other researchers have shown that there's this green climate is really the mediator between policy and behavior. And so, you know, thinking about the climate of your own organization and how rules can be modified so that they express sustainability orientation, I think becomes really important. One interesting finding by Rainieri and Paley, I think is how, I'm sure that's not how they pronounce it. They're from Quebec, so it's some wonderful French pronunciation. They indicate in their research that workers who don't actually have strong personal environmental beliefs really do become moved by a green organizational climate. So it's really especially important to have an green organizational climate, you know, cohesive, shared understanding of things in order to get people who haven't really thought much about it on board. You can see that it's also a moderator between intentions and behavior among people who have very strong sustainability intentions. So it seems to be good for both people who are already on board and for people who haven't really thought much about it. I mean, it's like social information processing, right? Here you've got some guidance, some social cues, some structure that serve as, you know, indications of how you should be behaving. So none of this should be a surprise, but I think it's really important that there's now actual data that supports these ideas specific to sustainability. You know, before it was just sort of a hypothetical, like, we're good at organizational change, it should be true for sustainability. Well, now there's emerging evidence that it is true for sustainability. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the diffusion of innovation model of spreading innovations, but I was never taught this in grad school and really didn't come across it until more recently. The diffusion of innovation really suggests that people who innovate tend not to be able to spread the word or spread the the use of their innovation themselves, because they tend to be kind of nerdy and stuff. So they depend on early adopters, people who are, have resources, and they tend to be willing to try stuff, and they develop a really good reputation for trying things and recognizing what's really cool and what's not going to work and that kind of thing. So getting some early adopters involved, and then especially looking for, there's a particular kind of early adopter called opinion leaders, and they tend to be really well connected. And so if you can get these folks on board, they have a lot of influence over others, either because they're highly respected, so that's one form of power, or because they are like super interconnected with other people. So when I do my work at St. Thomas, I try and figure out what the innovation is and who can take it to the next level. And we actually provide like financial support for these folks to get involved and try things out, and then speak to their peers about what they learn. And this is one way we have been able to really spread sustainability throughout our institution. Let's see, a couple of things about leadership. That's just I meant to take out that slide, sorry. Too much information on there. But the idea that I wanted to get across is that we as a field have studied leadership for a long, long time. But this research on sustainability leaders is very sparse. Although this Robertson has been doing some research, and there's been some indication very recently that, as you'd expect, leadership can make a big difference in employee environmental behavior. So just as some leaders are going to be more or less involved and like all gung-ho about sustainability, employees differ with how readily they respond to those leaders. And so people with an internal environmental locus of control, that is really a thing. There's a measurement tool that that you can use to figure out who's got an internal environmental locus of control and who doesn't. But you can imagine people who believe they've got some agency are more likely to actually engage and follow a leader who espouses environmental sustainability. There's some work on empowerment out there, a sense of authorization to act. This seems to sort of enable the self-determination of individuals. And just like you'd expect for like job characteristics, when people feel like their job is meaningful and impactful, they're much more satisfied and motivated. And so there's now some research out there that that supports that idea as well. So I'm really pleased that there's a bit of an uptick in research in this area specific to sustainability, just to validate that what has worked for all sorts of types of change in the past does seem to work also for sustainability. I really think that transformational leadership is a lever that we have, because it's so trainable and powerful in times of crisis. I think it is the right way to think about how to gear people up to lead change toward more sustainable organizations. So, typically, just as a reminder, transformational leaders really are passionate about whatever they're up to, in this case, sustainability. They don't try to disempower others. They actually help people believe that they can join in and encourage them to try changes, take risks. And they typically rely on a variety of kinds of power. They're trusted by others. They've got recognizable expertise. Others respect them. This has made a difference at St. Thomas, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. I did want to show that there is now an environmental transformational leadership scale. You know, generally speaking, sustainability related stuff is still in a phase of measurement anarchy, where there's just lots of different people coming up with lots of different measurement tools, and we really haven't landed on one in particular that seems to be well accepted. I think this shows a lot of promise. This is by Robertson, I had mentioned before, as somebody doing work on sustainability leadership. So this, I just wanted to point out on the shorts, there's a short scale of 4 items. There's a longer scale, I don't know, 15 items maybe. But you can see, you know, the transformational attributes here. My leader acts as an environmental role model. My leader takes note of my individual contributions. My leader is passionate about improving the future, and my leader urges me to think creatively about improving our organization's environmental performance. So it seems to have some face validity, and it also shows some psychometric reliability and validity as well. While we're on the topic of measurement, I do want to note that there now seems to be a measurement of green workplace behaviors that, well, there's a variety of them. And this article actually does a nice job of summarizing where they stand. I already showed you the transformational leadership. There's a validated scale to measure organizational environmental citizenship. Like I mentioned before, you know, I don't think it's enough just to rely on environmental citizens in an organization. I think it really does have to be embedded in people's day-to-day work. But nonetheless, I think it's valuable to look at this citizenship stuff as well. So there's some decent measurement stuff out there. So let me move to a case, and that is the University of St. Thomas. So our mission fits on the back of a match book, and it states that the university educates students to be morally responsible leaders who think critically, act wisely, and work skillfully to advance the common good. And so when we created a vision for sustainability, we riffed on that and landed on this: to catalyze university-wide engagement toward creating an embedded culture of sustainability that prepares students to be sustainability leaders during their university years and beyond. So the common good we specify as including sustainability, and we also emphasize the leadership. So when people see the vision for sustainability on campus, it's not this foreign concept. It nests very well into our mission. Oops, sorry, I meant to, this is the slide I was hoping to show you there. So we made sure that there was a very clear vision for sustainability, and we also got the we got our president on board, and her leadership has been really invaluable. She wasn't necessarily an expert on sustainability, and still wouldn't consider herself an expert, but on sustainability, but she is an expert on economics and accounting. So people believe her when she says it's the right thing to do financially to deal with sustainability. And she actually is the president of the institution, so she's got legitimate power, and students, faculty, and administrators alike really love her. And so she bears referent power as well. And these really help her in her transformational leadership role. She has communicated her passion and her expectations. And I love this quote that we now put on every document that we publish has this very clearly expressed. This is a quote from our president. This is not the job of one person, but of all of us. So we got her at the get-go to communicate and invite people to engage with us in this process. We created a clear plan, including some goal setting. So you can see here, there's a 3-year plan where the first year was that we created a baseline assessment. Then we looked at our strengths and weaknesses and created a plan that could help us move forward, especially on our weaknesses. And then the year 3 implementation plan, which we're in right now. So for our baseline assessment, there was ANARCHY. I don't know if you've heard of ANARCHY, but it's the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. This is like LEED certification or some other sustainability assessments that are out there. But collecting this baseline data took almost a year, and it was really informative. We were very clearly able to see where we had some huge gaps in our work, and then we could use that baseline data to come up with a strategic 5-year plan. And we created this strategic planning process based on IO principles on organizational development and change. We made sure that we had broad participation. We made sure that we had autonomous working groups. So we had courses working on this. We had individuals able to pipe up. We had the STARS report that told us where our gaps were. We had a visioning workshop. I wanted to show you briefly our idea wall, which allowed us to gather what people wanted the campus to look like in 5 or 10 years. And it was this very cool, it was app-like, where people could, create a comment, and they could like others, and they could bump up others, and they could include pictures, and they were colored according to the various categories. Was it about what they were learning? For students, is it how they get to work? Is it about what they purchase for their departments? That kind of thing. So we got over 1,000 unique users and 1,500 total visits from folks at St. Thomas. So it was very exciting that people were spending about 13 or 14 minutes looking at what other people had posted and posting their own stuff. We actually had these autonomous working groups from all of these different categories, and they put together their own part of the strategic plan. And then the plan was approved by the higher echelons of the administration, and then it was published, and we've been doing annual reports ever since to make sure that everything we do is transparent and that there is some level of accountability for people. So in our strategic plan, we made sure that people, when there was a specific activity that was going to be accomplished, there was a person's name whose job it was to make sure that that happened. One of our points of failure up until this was that we'd have all these great ideas, but no bodies to make them happen. And so it really became important to have a body with each idea who is responsible, not necessarily to do it themselves, but to make sure it got done in some way, shape, or form. And so one of the biggest gaps we found with our initial baseline was that we were doing a lot of really cool things, but they hadn't been institutionalized. So turns out we had all of the greenest computers that faculty and labs were using. They were all gold star computers, but there was no rule that they had to be gold star computers. So what we've been working on is trying to institutionalize all this good stuff so that no matter who's doing the job and under what circumstances, they know that all of the technology needs to be, you know, energy efficient to some standard. So we've been doing the same thing with courses. We've been doing the same thing with food purchasing. And we've been publishing progress reports each year. They serve many purposes. One is that accountability, but another one is celebration. We are making progress. We are doing really cool things. And it's really interesting how the people who are newer to St. Thomas, who have arrived in the last 2 to 3 years, thinks this is how it works here, right? This is their cultural experience, despite the rest of us who've been around forever knowing that this is kind of a new thing, right? But to somebody new to the institution, it is the dominant culture now, and it's super exciting. I need to be wrapping this up, right, Joe?
Well, about 15 minutes maybe.
Okay.
That would leave 15 for questions. Hey,
Yeah.
speaking of, do you guys
Yeah.
have any goals around, you know, be carbon free by X date?
2035.
Excellent.
So it's pretty ambitious. We're, I think we're 40% of the way there. But you know, as is typical, you know, the last half is going to be much harder than the first half. So, but we will have more momentum, more people on board, more strategies, and that kind of thing.
More solar panels.
Yes. Yes. So just a quick look back at this HR alignment with sustainability competencies. We have added sustainability to various job descriptions, not everything yet, but we're making progress. For instance, grounds manager. This was one of these situations where they put sustainability in there. None of the applicants had any sustainability experience, but they were all asked an interview question about sustainability. So even though none of them had previous experience, it became clear to them during the process that this is something they were going to be expected to do. So that when we did hire somebody, they were on board to get the training they needed to be able to do like integrated pest management and that kind of stuff. So, you know, the head of facilities thought it was a huge failure. And I'm like, no, it wasn't a failure at all. I mean, it would have been better to find somebody who had a sustainability background for that position, but we didn't. Yet that person knew it was a key part of their expectations about their work. So it's about setting expectations. There's orientation for faculty, orientation for staff, and orientation for students. Sustainability is embedded in all of those things now. And like I mentioned before, like students who are juniors think this is the way we do things on campus. Seniors are still belly aching about how, well, we used to be able to do this and we used to be able to do that. But the new folks see this sustainability culture and they're behaving accordingly, and they're super excited. Last year's freshmen, our university participated in an eco challenge that included like 400 other institutions, and St. Thomas got 4th place. Interestingly, the first year students kicked everybody's butts. They thought, you know, because it was provided in orientation and they have classes about this and it's everywhere now, it's just like, yeah, let's participate, let's do this thing. So it's super exciting. Every faculty member has to indicate whether they've done anything, any work in their classes or research on sustainability. They're not docked if they haven't, but they're celebrated if they have.
Can I
And
ask?
we now, yeah.
So it's a weird question, but I'm wondering if you've gotten any pushback from some of those students or student groups, especially those that might be entering college for the first time, and they aren't accepting that culture.
Not noticeably.
Or I guess resistance question, right?
Certainly. I'm sorry, what?
Resistance would be the right
yeah.
way to put it. Yeah.
So I would say that a dozen years ago, we got substantial resistance. Like when I would teach about interface carpet and Ray Anderson in my IO class, students would push back a lot about it being my agenda. But when it's in orientation and there are 100 classes in the curriculum that have a sustainability component, and there's composting everywhere and that kind of thing, it just is normalized. It just seems normal. And so I'm sure there are students who are offended or don't believe it, but it's hard for them to speak up and you know, just because for humans, it's hard to speak up against this status quo, right? So they tend not to say anything, and which allows the sustainability culture to continue. So another thing is that every year, and of course, it's always an annual thing rather than a monthly thing or biannual thing. In performance appraisals now, everybody is encouraged to have at least one of their 3 goals have a sustainability component to it. So they're not just being evaluated without context. They're encouraged to think about one way they can institute sustainability into their work life. And then, of course, then there's the follow-up the next year to see how did it go? What resources do you need? All that kind of stuff. Again, it's not mandatory, so we don't hear about pushback, but there are lots and lots of people who are engaging with the goal setting. And then I also, I've instituted, so a lot of this stuff is because I just go ahead and do it. And then if I get in trouble, I just ask for forgiveness. And one example of this is the reward structure. I made up an award. It's the, you know, innovative, I can't remember what the title is, but it's like for innovation in your class. And now you wouldn't believe the number of faculty who apply for this innovation award, and it's presented every year at the convocation with all the other important research awards and whatnot on campus. And it's just assumed that it's a thing, you know? So same thing with the courses. I'll talk about that just very briefly. I know I've got to be wrapping up, but let's see. So I've developed this system for getting faculty to teach sustainability in their courses. And so they now get sustainability stuff in their orientation. We offer development seminars. We offer them grants for time to think about how to change their courses. Then when they change their courses, we designate them as a SUST course. This is something we made up. We just said any course that has a sustainability component is going to be tagged sustainability. And it does lots of different things. It helps students seek out courses that have sustainability in them. It helps with our understanding of how many classes have this component so we can do some assessment. We created a minor, a sustainability minor, where you have to have 4 of these SUS designated courses. So now there are over 100 students who seek out these courses that faculty have developed. So it's this self-perpetuating system, because the students get excited and then they demand from professors who don't have a sustainability lens, they want to talk about it anyway. And so it sort of normalizes this as an important piece of how you talk about disciplines. Like we've got sustainability designations in over 30 of the disciplines at St. Thomas. So there are just ways to sort of chip away at that HR system where you're assessing people and giving them props for doing cool stuff. Same thing with staff. We orient them, we provide training, they do goal setting and performance. I've got to get an award made up for them too. I think, you know, there should be an award for students too. But you can see it's an incomplete system, but I'm chipping away at it one thing at a time, so it doesn't seem overwhelming. It just seems totally natural. Students get oriented. They have different learning communities that they can engage in that have to do with sustainability. There are research grants allocated. They get badges for their research posters that say it's green research. Yeah, there's just a lot going on, including the minor. So just to wrap things up, sustainability research in IO is growing ever so slightly, but it is growing. And I still think we're under engaged and that our toolbox is underutilized. So I would encourage everybody to be, you know, really linking the sustainability lens with all of the things you do in organizations. Ta-da.
That's
Thank
awesome,
you.
Elise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question and maybe one observation. I'm wondering, you know, the timing of things is often very important. Yet here we are with a long-term threat, and sometimes, you know, people will say, well, you know, we're running away from tigers. We're not worried about clean air and water.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you establish? I think maybe what you were saying about making it natural is the key. Just in everyday decisions, just kind of keep chipping away at it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as opposed to thinking about, you know, oh my God, we got 45 hurricanes. What are we going to do?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it is chipping away. It's finding other champions to help you chip away at it. And, you know, I put up that idea of the diffusion of innovation because I think it's super critical to find, you know, find the champion from within. Because me going around campus has its limits. You know, I can't be the only champion, right? Because then everybody sees me coming down the hall and it's like, oh my God, here she comes again, right? What I've found has been super helpful is that, you know, I have limited sway. People don't know me in the law school. So I can't just go into law school and say, you need to actually integrate sustainability into your clinics and your courses. But I can find the lawyer that everybody respects to do it in their class and then to share how they did it and share how the students responded to it and build the momentum that way. And so it's like these tentacles throughout the institution simply by identifying the key leader in each unit. And so when I got a $575,000 grant to help provide resources for people to do this, and I just give money away left and right to people to give them what they need to take, you know, take a course release or take some time during the summer to figure out a plan on how to get your colleagues involved. So I think it's, you know, we all now have the experience of things going viral on social media, right? So this is just the in vivo version of that, right? You have to get those people who have large networks on board so that they can share what they've learned and institute the activities in their own spheres. And that's, otherwise it's going to happen too slowly. You gotta, you know, just get those tentacles out throughout the institution.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So I know a lot of our membership are students. This is one we typically end off programs with, but what advice would you have for any IO master students or PhDs that are about to enter the workforce or formally enter academia?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think sustainability is one of those distinctive features that, all else being equal, if you know what's going on in this, you know, with sustainability, you're going to be in better shape as an applicant to many companies and some academic organizations. I mean, there are like 900 academic organizations that do that ASHE STARS report that I was talking about that we used for a baseline assessment. So you can actually find out who they are by going to the ASHE website, so that when you're in a job interview, you can say, hey, I see that you are involved in sustainability in all of these specific ways, and I can help with that. You know, my research could, be picked up by students who have that interest, you know, that kind of thing. So I think both in industry and in academics, you can distinguish yourself by understanding how your background is in sync with the needs of sustainability. So how do you get there? Well, I frankly highly recommend my textbook. It's an easy read. And it's just, it starts out with some basic data about, you know, the state of the planet, you know, so you can sort of wrap your head around, you know, what we're up against. And then it talks about cognition and, you know, social forces and learning and organizations. There's now a systems chapter that's got, you know, social networks and organizations and political movements. Yes. And the 5E will be coming out in March. And we designed the textbook so that it would be really welcoming and easy to read. And so it shouldn't be onerous, and you can get yourself caught up pretty easily, because you'll know so much already about the psychology of it. It's just sort of, you know, connecting the dots between what you already know and what's needed. Does that, anybody want to ask anything more specific? Any students?
I just want to echo what you said, Dr. Amel. I'm working with Ecolab, and they have a very strong sustainability statement, and that's something I guess students could use to align themselves with companies that have that outlook and kind of take that very seriously.
Absolutely. Just like you would, you know, do your research anyway of a company before you go in an interview, check out their sustainability report, and then imagine what your work in the HR department or research and development or whatever area you're in could engage to make that happen faster and better. Excellent point.
Other questions, gang? Come on, Bill, you're always good for one.
Good to see you, Bill.
Hi, Elise. Always good to see you and to hear your message. It's a good message.
Thank you.
So I guess I've got a comment rather than a question, and that's that, you know, actually it addresses Roger's question. When you run into resistance, one of the things that you can say is that the first article on the greenhouse effect was published in 1896. And if you still think it's not in effect, you're behind in your reading.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You
Yeah.
know, one of the things that I think, you know, kind of resonated with me is that sustainability, it's not just an abstract thing. It's so easy and natural to link that to a business because anybody wants their business to be around in 10 years, right?
Right.
It's just part of being sustainable as a business.
Right. Yeah,
And,
actually go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, to pile on to what Joe said. So I teach counselors, and the first thing that I try to teach them is that they have to sustain themselves in a burnout business. So it's a message that kind of resonates if you put it that way. You know, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would also say that if you do encounter people who are resistant, I would highly encourage listening to them to figure out what their values are and then frame the actions in a way that's consistent with their values. You know, this sort of framing research that's been done in social psychology for a long time actually works. I was in a meeting with some administrators, and it wasn't that they were against sustainability, but it wasn't the priority. And I was able to say, but you just said that you wanted the institution to be around for another 100 years. That's sustainability. I actually, and I did, now that I think of it, have some resistance from our CFO. Initially, we would get into some pretty hot debates about this, but then I ran into him at the cobbler. He was getting his shoes repaired. And I said, how sustainable of you? And he's like, but this is what it is. It's about saving money. It's about taking care of the things that you love. You know, it's like, so it's oftentimes when people have children, that is the way to get them to understand the incentive to do to deal with climate change now, right? Because they want a good life for their children down the road. It's a little bit harder when people don't believe in climate change, but if they do believe in climate change, the urgency can sometimes be sort of brought to the surface with some framing techniques.
I think it's a lot less abstract than it used to be, just because we're seeing so many, you know, bad events, and businesses and insurance companies are paying attention to it, and you know, it's in our face, right? It's hard not to believe anymore, but you got, you know, a third of the country not believing any mainstream media, and you know, good luck getting them to believe in science. Yeah,
you know, there's this really fun video that is an example of the diffusion of innovation. And I'm trying to remember what festival it was. Derek Sievers, if you look for the TED Talk by Derek Sievers, it's a really fascinating example of how you've got the innovator who's a little bit weird, but then you get the early adopter who's, you know, got a better cool factor that entices other people who have more connections, and then you get like the mainstream engaged. And once that mainstream is engaged, the people who've been really resistant up until that point are just, they are compelled to join in for fear of being left behind. So in some ways, I think it's not that essential to directly engage people who are resistant, because they'll eventually fall into what's normal. It's a matter of getting that critical mass of the people who are willing, the coalition of the willing.
Do you think the Green New Deal will take off?
Well, see, there are so many framing problems right now. Like defund the police just makes me crazy, because that's not, really what they're asking for, but it's really off-putting. The Green New Deal is associated with people who are considered fringe. So that, my guess is that the Biden administration is going to actually do a lot of the stuff that's in the Green New Deal, but it's just not going to call it that because, as much as I personally, respect AOC, she's a real turnoff for a lot of folks. So, let's hope that framing doesn't get in the way.
Yeah. As soon as you put specifics on something, you've given anybody who wants to attack it a way in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look at how ridiculous this is. They said this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's complex and a little frightening, but hopefully tomorrow, people.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow's a new day.
There's always hope.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing we're seeing is that the incoming students already know it's their future, and they're not resistant in quite the same way as older generations have been to sustainability.
I'm curious from a employment brand, employment reputation standpoint, are there any trends you're seeing? I was quickly looking at Glassdoor and didn't see any sort of ratings about environment. Comparably had an environment category. Anything that you're seeing there as folks sort of looking from that lens?
That's an excellent question, and I do not have an answer because I'm not familiar with
Glassdoor, yeah.
Glassdoor. So is that a recruitment tool or?
Yeah, sure. It's like it rates the CEO.
Okay.
And that sort of thing. There's a number there.
I've learned something. I'm I'm gonna check this out.
Yeah.
I don't see. I don't see. I mean, other than the CEO survey that was done, that I had, I can send it to Joe. That report showed that the vast majority of the 1,300 CEOs that were interviewed believe that this is, that sustainability and environmental and DEI work are like the critical risk factors right now that need to be addressed. So I guess from the perspective of, trends, that seems to be pretty solid. About differentiation, I'm not quite sure, like between different parts. I mean, the green economy is like the fastest growing sector of the economy. So I think, there are a lot of jobs out there for people who, have that competency. But I don't know, specific to the Glassdoor type framework.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the interesting things about this is that there are big segments of the economy that are invested in this and ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. There's money to be made, and people are out there doing it, making money doing good things, and like that.
Yeah,
And the economists know an awful lot about getting incentives aligned. We need to pay attention to how big a factor that is.
Mm-hmm. I think it'll be interesting to see where the sharing economy goes, because that's obviously been disrupted by the pandemic, but had a lot of potential for growth. If you think like Bird Scooter and, all the different last mile, all the different solutions for getting people from public transportation to their house or their job. I think that is an area where we might see an explosion of opportunity. if I could pick any company to work for, it would be Tesla. Just as weird as Elon Musk is, you know, to provide the resources so that people can dream this big and do things so differently must be amazing to work for that company.
No, it's interesting, Elise. This was already several years ago. I was down at the Highbridge plant, Excel Energy, and watching them buy power off the grid because it's a peaking plant, and they only need to start that plant when they can't buy power off the grid. And the cheapest power is wind and solar.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they buy first.
Yeah, that's been a real turnaround for sure.
Yep.
So batteries are going to be the next big breakthrough.
Yep.
Thank you so much for having me and for the great discussion. Feel free to email me. Actually, the email here says sustainability at St. Thomas. You could email me directly. It's E-L as in Louise, A-M-E-L, and at stthomas.edu for any questions that you have.
Before we have a lot more people drop off here, I want to remind everyone that be sure to tune in next month for Travis Toubray from River Falls and Carlson School of Business. He'll be talking about employee wellness interventions and when the right time to do that is. And then all of a sudden people just stopped dropping off. Like I saw it. All right. See, that got their attention, or they walked away. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Elise. I missed your last talk, and I'm glad I got to tune into this one.
And Elise,
Nice
you
to
get to attend all of our sessions for the rest of the year for free. So.
Woo! All right. All right. That's exciting. Well, thank you, everybody. And I'm actually kind of curious, how many people ended up showing up?
I think we had about 25 at the most.
26,
yeah.
25, yeah.
Okay, great. Good. Excellent. Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Elise.
Thank you.